Time. What is time? Good question, glad you asked. Time is a fundamental measurement of the universe that defines when things happen and how long they take. For instance, how long it takes for this yo-yo to return to my hand. It's an extremely important part of what makes up the universe as a whole, and without it, nothing would ever, well, happen. There would be no when to exist. Because of how important this concept is for everything to exist, measuring it became an extremely useful tool to have. Time measuring really only started a couple thousand years ago, but they were extremely important for figuring out when things would happen. And it all started with the day. By far the oldest unit of time is the day, which defines how long it takes for the Earth to spin around its axis 360 degrees. This gives off the illusion of the sun rising in the east and setting in the west. And this is extremely important for humans, as not only do they define when plants are able to grow, thus influencing agriculture, but it also creates the day-night sleep cycle which humans use to rest at the end of the day. Because of these important aspects, the day became the first thing that we really began to consistently measure, and was the start of our overall time measuring system. Now, to kind of put into perspective how many time measurements there really are, because there are a lot, I'm going to be using this handy dandy little invention that I came up with that I like to call the timeline. This little contraption will show all the time measurements that we currently use in the modern day, from the small to the tall. And right in the center, we have the day. So, now that we've covered that, we can finally move on and take a look at the lower time scale. The first lower time measurement that we use is the hour, which was created by the Egyptians. Now, the Egyptians counted in quite the interesting way, as rather than count by tens, which we call the decimal system, they counted by 12s, which was later known as the duodecimal system, or base 12. So, when creating the hour measurement, they split the daytime hours into 12 different segments to make it easier to count. As for the night, considering that there was no sun to track, they had no easy way to divide it, but eventually they came up with a solution. By tracking the constellations in the sky, referred to as decans, they were able to track time over the course of the night. Now, in total, there were 36 decans, but only 18 decans in a full night. However, because of sunrise and sunset, 3 of the constellations weren't visible on either side, so it decreased to 12, therefore 12 hours in the day and 12 hours in the night. Eventually, the system got condensed into the simplified 24-hour day by the Greeks, which is what we still use to this day. However, even this unit of measurement wasn't short enough to be easily counted, and so the measurement will be divided yet again into what would later be known as the minute and the second. The idea of dividing the hour into smaller segments was thought of by the Greeks, who used the numbering system from the Babylonians, who learned it from the Sumerians to divide it up. The Babylonians, similar to the Egyptians, also counted in a different way from what we're used to today, as they counted by 60s, otherwise known as the sexagesimal system or base 60. So when the Greeks divided the hour up, they split it into 60 different pieces and then divided those pieces into 60 more pieces. Each division of 60 was called a minute, so the first division of 60 was called the first minute, and the second division of 60, the second minute. These names were later shortened simply into the minute and the second, which is what we use to this day. However, due to modern advancements, even more precise times were required, and so they would be divided once more into what is now known as the millisecond. During the French Revolution, the metric system was finally adopted, utilizing the base 10 system for all of its measurements. And while the metric system never changed much about time, although it did try, it did add some measurements that we still use, that of which being the decisecond, the centisecond, and, of course, the millisecond. These 3 time measurements, representing a tenth, hundredth, and thousandth of a second respectively, were especially useful in predicting precise and accurate measurements. Interestingly though, deciseconds and centiseconds aren't commonly used measurements, and most people tend to stick with the millisecond due to its accuracy. Even then though, since all this does is essentially edit the prefixes of the measurements, these can, in theory, go on forever, giving us measurements like microseconds and picoseconds. And just like that, we finally reached the end of the lower time scale. All the measurements from hours to seconds and beyond, all plotted out on our timeline. And now that that's done, there's nowhere left to go but up. Finally, now we can talk about the other side of our timeline. Let's see what the first measurement is. Okay, here we go. Weeks were a concept created by the Babylonians and reintroduced by the Romans, defined as a period of 7 days. It was created based off of the 7 classical celestial bodies, those which being the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And if you think about how the days of the week are named, it actually makes a lot of sense. The sun is for Sunday, the moon is for Monday, okay, close enough, and Saturn is for Saturday, which is really cool. Sadly, that's where the week decides to stop making sense and instead decides to be the most convoluted part of the entire thing. As then we get to Wednesday, which is named after Mercury. What? Okay, so here's the working theory. See, all the planets in the solar system, with the exception of Uranus, are named after various Roman gods and goddesses. So Mars is named after Mars, Venus is named after Venus, etc. And when coming up with the days of the week, the Romans named each of the days after each of the Roman gods. However, those gods were later reinterpreted into Germanic deities, not to be confused with Germany, specifically by the Anglo-Saxons. And when these gods and goddesses were renamed, it changed the names of the days of the week as well. And over time, those Germanic names eventually morphed into the names that we have today. Okay, here's an example. The planet Venus is named after the Roman goddess Venus. However, it was later reinterpreted into the Germanic deity Frigg. They then named a day after Frigg, which eventually became what we know now as Friday. And then, of course, this pattern continues for all other days as well. Alright, sure, sounds convoluted, but sure, except for the fact that weeks are completely pointless and serve no general use of any form, as not only are weeks now outdated due to the discovery of two other planets, Uranus and Neptune, but also the entire concept of having 7-day periods in general makes no sense. It's not even, it's a prime number. Like, okay, 10 or 12-day weeks, sure, makes sense. We've already used those numbers in our timeline already, but 7? Why 7? It's just... Okay, finally. The next measurements on our timeline are months and years, which each are two fundamental components of the calendar. Months are defined as the amount of time it takes for the moon to orbit the Earth, whereas years are defined as the amount of time it takes for the Earth to orbit the sun. Years also have the side effect of causing the seasons to change, as due to the Earth's tilt, the sun will hit the Earth at different angles depending on where it orbits, bringing us the seasons of summer, fall, winter, and spring. Because of this fundamental change to weather and the seasons, years were another one of the things that we first began to consistently measure, along with the day. In fact, the first ever appearances of measuring the year and the month throughout history dates back to one of the first civilizations, period, Sumer. They had used what they'd learned from observing time into what would later be known as the calendar, which tracked the days over the course of a year and then split those years into multiple months. These calendars would also introduce leap years, which would add an extra day every 4 years to fill in certain missing gaps. Except not really. The actual definition of leap year states that an extra day is added every 4 years, unless that year is a new century, in which case it's not used, unless that new century is divisible by 400, in which case it is used? Convolutions aside, these calendars ended up being so incredibly useful for tracking the seasons that we still widely use them even after centuries of use. Speaking of which... We are now finally at the other end of our timeline with the reintroduction of the metric system once again, but this time rather than make divisions of the second, we have multiples of the year. So, to refer to longer stretches of time, we have the decade, referring to a period of 10 years, the century, referring to a period of 100 years, and the millennium, referring to a period of 1,000 years. And if you think about it, that actually makes a lot of sense, as on the other end we have the decasecond for a tenth of a second, the centisecond for a hundredth of a second, and the millisecond for a thousandth of a second. They share the same prefixes and thus follow the same rules. However, in terms of multiple years, this is really the extent of multi-year measurements we have. The only other measurements that even really exist are the biennium, referring to 2 years, and the lustrum, referring to 5 years, neither of which being used very often, which means we've finally reached the end of our timeline, from seconds to years and everything in between, all plotted out in its extensive glory. So, conclusion. Time is an extremely important aspect of our lives that we take for granted. It tells us when things happen and how long they take, and in the modern day, no one really gives a second thought about it. Our lives are so hyper-focused on measuring time that we don't even notice it half the time. From seconds to years, we use these simple little measurements every single day of our lives. The history of time measurements is extensive and extends for as long as, well, time. So next time you ask yourself, I wonder what time it is, just think about where it all began. Or, don't, because it's an absolute nightmare!